All right. Well, welcome everyone to the very first pre-recorded virtual coffee with a curator session. Thank you so much for understanding life circumstances prevented us from having a live session today. But I've got my colleague here, Brittany Sealey. She is the education curator at KSU's Museum of History and Holocaust Education. She's also a huge fan of Kate Chopin's novel, The Awakening, which is a novel obviously we'll be discussing today. So welcome, Brittany.
Thank you, JoyEllen. You want me to introduce myself or anything?
Yeah, I think that would be really nice because I don't think we've met you before in our Coffee with a
No.
Curator space.
All right. So, hi, everyone. As JoyEllen said, my name's Brittany, and I'm the education curator at the museum. And so I really focus on creating K-12 exhibits and programs for the museum. I'm currently working on a new exhibit called The Sky's the Limit, Women Pilots of World War II. So please come to our opening next. Is it next Thursday? Oh my gosh, I think it's next Thursday, the 23rd.
Yes, it is.
From 6 to 8 p.m. Whole different topic, but I think related with, women and empowerment and women really challenging boundaries of society at the time. So I'm really excited to talk about this book today because as JoyEllen knows now, I love it and have loved it for years.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brittany. So, getting into kind of an introduction to the topic, some of you may have heard of the book. Probably a lot of people have. Some may have read it, some not. I don't know how many of you may have read it in high school or in your college years. Brittany, did you read it in high school first?
Yeah, the first time I read it was high school.
Yeah, so did I. I was trying to think back to when I first read it, and it was my AP language class in high school, and it was really interesting. I think I remember I thought it was good at that time. Actually, this is my copy that I have. I have the Penguin Classics copy that has annotations in it from when I was 17. So that has been really fun. I've reread it in preparation for this program. So that has been really interesting seeing my annotations. And I think, I'm in a different season of life now. So I think I, understand the novel on I think like a bit of a deeper level, I would say. Not that, just being a wife and a mother, not saying that I would make any choices that Edna made or would want that for my life. But I think just having a deeper level of understanding there. And then also, I think just like my reading comprehension is better. There were a couple parts in the margins where I completely misunderstood the novel. And I wrote annotations and I'm like, that is wrong. There were a couple points where I misunderstood. So it was cool to go back and be like, okay, I think I just like I was tired. I was ready to be done with homework. And I don't think that I completely was reading closely enough. So anyway, I think that's pretty funny. But let's go ahead and dive in. So what I wanted to start with is really just, Brittany, you talk about kind of when you first read the novel, and then, what do you like about it? What resonates with you? And why do you still care about it all these years later?
Yeah, so kind of like you, the first time I read it was in high school. I think it was IB American Literature. So it's either 11th or 12th grade. And that year, I remember it was not just this novel. It was several things I read that year. It was the first time that it dawned on me that writing was an art form, and that I really started loving literary analysis, that I, started seeing all of the things that writers were doing. And this was the first thing that I read that I really saw that. And so I liked it the first time. I think what stood out to me the first time reading it was just that appreciation for the symbolism for every word, especially in such a short novel. every word having meaning and being intentionally used. That was something that I loved. I ended up writing a paper on the symbolism of her clothing throughout the novel and comparing it to other characters. And that's something like, again, when I was reading it, I was like impressed with my high school self for, picking up on that as I was reading. But then I read it again in college. And I don't remember if it was in one of my later undergraduate years or as a graduate student. And like you said, the meaning changed because at that point in my life, I was in a different point. I was starting to get to that phase where I was questioning my place in society and questioning, societal norms and, seeing problems in society. And so I really connected more in my second reading to the character and her kind of struggle with this duality of living in society and feeling differently, questioning things and feeling that tug of war. And so that's when I started wanting to collect different versions of the book. I don't have my original version. It was falling apart. And so I eventually got a Library of America copy, more as just a collection item, as a display item, not to read because it's just so nice. I don't want to mess.
Those are nice ones.
And then I was searching for other copies and I got really frustrated because I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of the copies available, I hate the cover art because they show Edna in the kind of traditional Victorian clothing, which is really the opposite of what she becomes. It's really her starting character. And it bothered me that, this whole book is about her moving away from that. Right. And that was the cover art. And so it's one of the reasons I enlisted your help in finding another version. But I also found this copy at Underground Books in Carrollton. And it is, let me see who the publisher is. World Cloud Classics in San Diego. And I really liked it because it has a lot of the quotes from the book on the front and on the back. And it has the kind of like waves for the kind of ocean theme throughout. And so I thought this was better than her kind of Victorian, cover art look. But that's where I kind of fell in love with the book. And honestly, reading it this most recent time, just like you, other things stuck out as well. But I remember, as I sat down to read it again, almost immediately, my thought was, this is still so relevant. This still connects so much. And I could see people reading this today and still connecting with it on an equal level. And so just really interesting.
I think that's marvelous. And I think it's also really marvelous that the book had it kind of such an effect on you when you were in high school and you saw that impact. It became stronger, but it also kind of changed a little bit as you got older. And I'm so glad you mentioned that about the cover art as well, because one thing that I thought was interesting, I've been kind of listening to some podcasts and some criticisms, about different copies of The Awakening. And it was interesting to see that the podcast folks were, I'm not going to say which version it was that they were, but they read the synopsis even of The Awakening on a very popular version of it that probably a lot of students in schools read. And they were basically like really kind of ripping that apart. And I never thought about that. But between, the cover art perhaps showing Edna and not really being accurate about like who she's becoming. And then the synopsis was a little bit sensational, I guess, and kind of like missing the point about what the novel is about. It's kind of interesting. I guess, a lot of people who care about the novel especially and like really understand it are like, this is not doing it justice at all. Like between the cover art and this, synopsis here, that's not even a synopsis of the actual message. Yeah. So yeah, that's really interesting. So thank you for telling us a bit about that. I thought we could go through And, I don't know, just talk about just a few interesting scenes or maybe some things we enjoy. It doesn't have to be scene related. It could just be wording and just the language, diction, the tone of the novel. Um, so I wanted to kind of start with just two things that I think, again, one thing that I kind of already started talking about, but kind of this my own maturity and how my reading of it is impacted by the years that have gone by since high school. And it's, I think, one thing that, being completely transparent here, reading it, I think when I was really, I was in high school, I liked the novel, but I think I was like a little bit confused by some of Edna's choices and some of the things that she felt. And because I hadn't really, I hadn't felt that yet. I was, I was responsible for myself and myself only. And I think as I've, gotten married and like have a child, it's been interesting because again, I don't feel anywhere like Edna did, but I guarantee that even if they don't admit it, I think most women who, have children and have expectations put on them that are maybe domestic, I think everyone has felt that a little bit at some point, even if you don't want to admit it. I think everyone has, like, I know I certainly have. You feel that in moments of, that moments of turmoil. I mean, I'm glad that I don't have it where it's all over me all the time, but it was interesting kind of admitting to myself that I have probably thought like this or felt like this in several moments. So that was a little uncomfortable, I think, at first. I don't know.
Yeah, I imagine, women reading this and just the kind of honest way she portrays this tug of war of feelings. Because at times there's one part in the book where she has not seen her kids in a while, and then she goes and sees them, and she's so happy to see them.
She's so happy. She's ready to see them.
But then she leaves again, and at first she feels bad, and then it's kind of back to, that indifference. And so like that kind of, it's not clear cut. It's not cut and dry. It's this back and forth. And even, besides with just the children, there's times where she's like, I feel really bad and I don't know why I feel bad. And today I wake up and I feel really happy and I don't know why I feel happy. And I think that's so honest and especially in a way written at the time that, talking about women's feelings and, having multiple complex feelings and having to like put on a face for other people, which she stops doing eventually. But that's something that I just imagine would be so relatable over time.
Yeah. And I think that, yeah, so I started to realize, okay, this is really, I think we all, most women and have moments like this and have times like this and yeah, can relate in some way. Even if you can try to convince yourself that you don't, I think everyone in some way does. I also wanted to say, I think too, one thing that I did not get, and I think when we're in high school, obviously we're reading the novel, but I think we're also being taught the novel. And so there's another person's interpretation there for that, your teacher, like you kind of feel like what your teacher says is probably true, even though we've learned later on that, that's not how literature works. But I think I wasn't taught one aspect of the novel when I was in high school. And now reading it again, I was like, how did I miss this? I think having come into my Black womanhood, I think that I view Edna very differently as well. I think I find a lot of fault with her. And I'm like, you are only as liberated as the backs of Black women allow you to be. And I think that sometimes that made me it was really interesting reading that and seeing what was, people that, the Black women that didn't have voices and who aren't even privileged enough to have an awakening. I think that was interesting too.
I had the exact same thing when I read it this past time. I was like, how did I not see? I didn't see those characters in the book. I could not have told you. If you had asked me before I reread it about the women of color in the book, I wouldn't have remembered any of them existed.
I wouldn't have either.
From high school. Like I did not.
From high school, yeah.
I did not remember. And so when I read it this time, I was like, it stood out to me. But yeah, definitely, which is really interesting. Even with the time I read it in college, I don't remember that standing out, which to me makes me think it was definitely undergrad, because if it had been grad school, it definitely would have stood out to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's really interesting. And I think too, sometimes maybe, I don't know if I just kind of like, especially me being a person of color, I was like, how did I miss that? But I think I kind of compartmentalized it as though that was this time. This, for me, when I was, that age, I guess I just was used to, and also my teachers probably didn't bring it out as much. And so that really wasn't what they were tackling about the novel. So maybe I just didn't really. But I think for me, I don't see myself in Edna. I see myself in the unnamed Black woman who would be serving her while she went off and did whatever, had her awakening, and be like, so I think that was interesting to read. And I say this at so many Coffee with the Curators, but such a big fan of reading novels more than once, like, especially when some time has gone by. I really think that's important for everybody to think about, to read novels more than once. It's like it's a new book. It's amazing. I wanted to go back to something that you talked about, Brittany, about the language and about every word having meaning. So even at points in the novel, at this reading that I've done, where I got a little bit frustrated at Edna or whatever, or I was like, I was having my Black woman revelation here. I have to say, like, Kate Chopin's language, it's like seductively calming to me. Oh my goodness. I could read it all day. And it's even like languorous when it needs to be, even though the novel, it keeps moving, but sometimes I feel like things are happening in slow motion, and I don't know if they are or not. But like when Edna moves or she gets a handkerchief, I just like imagine it. Like, I don't know.
That's funny. That, like, I never would have described it that way, but that is kind of how it plays out in your head. And what's interesting is, so this time when I read it, one thing that I picked up on that, again, I don't know how I missed this before because the title is The Awakening, but there's a lot of like back and forth between like exhaustion, sleeping, restlessness, and a kind of dreamy state. And that's a lot of the description is like that too, is like this kind of like half awake, half asleep, dreamy kind of feeling where things kind of like slow down for a minute. Or so I almost feel like you're in Edna's head, like her kind of blurring of being awake and asleep type of thing, that kind of dream world with the descriptions.
That is really good. I don't know if I could have described that better. I think that is really, really good. It does feel like you are, yes, in a dream, in this half awake state for most of the novel.
Yeah.
And that is really, really interesting. Just to give our virtual audience an idea of, I really like this. This is early on in the novel, but just to give an idea of some of the language and things happening in slow motion, I just wanted to read a paragraph. This is when Mr. Pontellier is seeing his wife, Edna, and Robert come back. I think they were out near the water and they're coming back. And I just wanted to read because it's just beautiful, just to give y'all an idea if you haven't read the novel already. Mr. Pontellier finally lit a cigar and began to smoke, letting the paper drag idly from his hand. He fixed the gaze upon a white sunshade that was advancing at a snail's pace from the beach. He could see it plainly between the gaunt trunks of the water oaks and across the stretch of yellow chamomile. The gulf looked far away, melting hazily into the blue of the horizon. The sunshade continued to approach slowly. Beneath its pink-lined shelter were his wife, Mrs. Pontellier, and young Robert Lebrun. When they reached the cottage, the two seated themselves with some appearance of fatigue upon the upper step of the porch, facing each other, each leaning against a supporting post. I feel like a painting just happened, and I just see them just.
Yeah. Well, and I love how she describes things too, because you can just feel, I can just imagine, on a summer day walking across the beach and you're kind of hot under the shade, you sit down and kind of lean back and you're, fanning yourself. Because I think later in the scene, she gets the fan out and
He does.
yeah, I can just feel it, that summer humidity and the like breeze of the beach, the way she describes it.
Exactly. And I feel like the words are so easy on my ears. And I think also having French kind of peppered throughout the novel.
The French did not help me.
It didn't help me. Love it. I just like, oh, I wish I spoke that way. I love it. But I feel like everything too is I feel like if I were to picture these things happening in my head, everything would be in like a pastel color palette. Like nothing would be bright or garish or anything. And then also, I think you already alluded to this, Brittany, but this like water motif, ocean motif that we have, it's it's a little foreboding, I think. And I think even if you haven't read the novel before, I think that someone could probably pick up on that. What do you think?
It's interesting because I definitely read it as foreboding and a threat almost this time around. And I picked up on how early on it takes on those characteristics. But the first two times I read it, that is not how I viewed it. I viewed it as like freeing, as like, freedom and, nature, and it's open and it's beautiful. And I think maybe it's because of the way it's described. Sometimes the words are just so beautiful. But this time, definitely right off the bat, before she's even, on her own, it takes on that characteristic of, potentially a threat. And there's the foreshadowing right from the beginning that it could be deadly.
Right. I got a little bit, and again, this is my second reading, but I got a bit of a chill. In my copy, it's on page 56 when Edna wasn't going to go for a swim. And then Robert said, "Oh, come," he insisted. "You mustn't miss your bath. Come on. The water must be delicious. It will not hurt you. Come." And I was just like, oh. I just got such a chill. But I love that. So since we're talking about Edna and her swimming, her frequent baths, let's talk a bit more about Edna and kind of whether it's physically or mentally, because they do describe her physically a lot. Or Kate Chopin describes her physically a lot. So I don't know, Brittany, anything that stands out to you about Edna's physique, about how she carries herself at any point in the novel?
So one thing that stood out to me this time was that she's described as different from other women, as looking different from other women, how she might not stand out right away, but if you look at her closer, then she's, this beautiful woman. And I don't know if I liked that description of her being different physically, different from other women, that there's just something that sets her aside. And I think the reason I didn't love that was that to me, it makes her less relatable. It makes it less of a every woman's story. It makes it sound like there's something inherent about her that's, set aside or different. So it was a little bit like that, oh, if you look hard enough, she's beautiful, instead of just, I don't know. I'm not sure what it was about that. And then the other thing that obviously stood out to me even in high school was the descriptions of her clothing, and everyone's clothing really, but how she gradually goes from wearing more to wearing less. and wearing more comfortable clothing, wearing clothing that's more suitable to what she's doing instead of for an appearance. So that stood out to me too.
That's a great point. I also noticed that at several points in the novel, her like different parts of her body, like her arms or
Her leg,
her
yeah.
legs are described, and they're always described as like strong. I've
Hmm.
noticed, like they like strong, like haven't been used but ready to be
Yeah.
used. Like she's got some like girth to her. So notice that, yeah, but you're right. The novel literally said that there's something that kind of differentiated her from other women. So that's a really good point. So anyway, I found that to be interesting. Um, One thing that I would like to get into as well, how do you kind of reconcile the character of Madame Ratignolle? Because it's interesting. Now, I don't know this for sure. I think that because Kate Chopin had 6 children, and
Hmm.
from what I've researched, I think her children said that she was like a really great mom. From what I've heard, and I think I learned this from a professor in college, perhaps that I think her children, if I think they said that she was more like Madame Ratignolle as a character, like their mother. That's how I think they remember Kate Chopin, maybe. I don't know that for sure. I think that I learned that. But even the way Edna interacts with Madame Ratignolle seems that she's always like she's enamored of like her look. I know that.
Hmm.
Um, I think Madame Ratignolle, again, she's expecting. So she's curvy and she's you know I think everything just seems to always be like flowing from
Yeah.
her, just effortlessly being this so the way Edna, I think she doesn't want to be around her as much at the end,
Hmm.
but they are friends.
Yeah.
I
It's almost like she, to me, and maybe this is, maybe how Chopin is like seeing herself, these two parts of herself.
ah
Because
Good point.
it's almost like Edna is looking at her like almost intrigued, like, I
Mm-hmm.
know this is what I'm supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so easy for her, just intrigued about
Right.
how is someone like this? How is she so perfect um, in this role? But then there is, especially towards the end, almost this not animosity, but almost like a frustration. And I don't think it's towards her. I think it's almost internal of,
I think
why
so.
do I still kind of want those things? Or why can't I fill that role? And like being near her makes Edna feel guilty almost. It makes her question what she wants because she sees it in another woman and starts thinking, oh, maybe those are still things I'm supposed to want, or I feel bad for not wanting them.
Of course, that's a great point. And again, something that's I think very applicable still today. And it's one of those things too. And I'll say this, my mom watches these and I'm gonna attend my programs and I'll say it. One thing that's really interesting when I look at like my mother and my grandmother, they've like, for example, worked like on and off. But their goal was home with children. That's what their like main priority in life was to raise children. And my mother and my grandmother are such incredible, they're so good with children and with just homemaking. They're like so good at it. And it's interesting to me because I think sometimes, like there is that, obviously I love being a wife, but I have to work. Like I really enjoy working. And, you know, like I don't like cleaning my house. And so I don't, because I don't like it. And then I look at like someone, like some of my maternal forebears, and I'm just like, am I supposed to like that? Why are they so good at it? How come my grandma's makes her own tomato sauce for her spaghetti? And I am barely able to like get the meat browned half the time. And like, seriously, I'm like, I'm like, should I be that? Um, you know, and then sometimes you're like, so I can kind of see that. Even my example, which isn't like, exactly like Edna's and Madame Ratignolle, sometimes I think I can see you just start to question, you start to look and be like, am I supposed to?
Yeah. And especially for Edna, who really, once she steps away from being a wife and a mother, she doesn't have a clear path.
Right.
There's not a kind of end goal or a kind of clear, okay, well, I'm going to be a career woman or anything like that. And part of that is because of her class status, where, she has never had to work or anything. And so, I think of that, even, in my own life, I have a job that I can kind of fixate on, if I don't have a family. And I think that that is a big part of, how this story ends is she didn't see a path forward. And she's really looking at other characters, trying to find an example of,
right.
What her next step is or who she's supposed to be. And she never finds that, which is really sad. I think this is the most depressing read I've had of the book, is the most recent one. But she's constantly seeking out other people to have some kind of, almost to try to clarify what her role is supposed to be and what her path is supposed to be. She, buys her own house. Well, I don't know if she actually pays for it, but she has her own house.
Yeah.
And that's a scene that when I was younger stood out to me, but also now kind of stands out to me because that's such a huge, move to step out into your own home. And she, works on the house and she's doing all these things, but it's still it's never enough. She's always still searching for that.
Exactly. You're right. The move was a big thing for her. Her painting, which, I think when you first read the novel, you might be, okay, this is going to make her happy. Like, this is what she wanted. And then, that doesn't quite do it. Tries having an affair. That doesn't do it. And again, like, it's so interesting seeing. Yeah. And that's one of the things I'm trying to find the exact page. I'm so mad because I can't remember. Oh, here it is. I highlighted it. One of the things that, like you're saying, she doesn't, kind of have something like once she's kind of given up family life. It's like, what is going to fulfill Edna? She doesn't know. And so a lot of what she says, I think, isn't quite lucid sometimes. I think she's kind of just all over the place. But one thing that she said that I was thinking, even though she didn't quite have a plan and didn't exactly know where she was going, when she was talking to Madame Ratignolle about like sacrifice, I thought it was really, really interesting. When she told Madame Ratignolle that I wouldn't, sacrifice myself for my children or for anyone. And then, Madame was like, that's ridiculous. And they got into an argument. But then Edna said, I would give up the unessential. I would give my money. I would give my life for my children, but I wouldn't give myself. And I think that is a really big, I think that is kind of like that's pretty much the only clear thing that I think she knows throughout the novel is that she will not give up herself. And we see that all the way to the end. That is the one thing that I think she has decided. The only thing that makes sense to her. And so I was actually thinking about that too. Like now I was like, that's a really interesting thing. Like I would give my life for those, those I love, but not myself. And I was really thinking about that. And I actually, because I was thinking about like, wow, I think I agree with that. Without like, I don't want to give up my soul to like anyone. I mean, so I don't know why I missed that the first time, but to me, that's the only real direction that Edna has.
Well, and I think she's confused too because she has that in her head, but she's also almost convinced herself this is all about Robert.
Right.
Which is interesting because she starts kind of awakening and having these thoughts even before she has any feelings for Robert. And
Right.
it's almost like she's latching onto that as like, if only he comes back and he stays, like that will fix it. But I think she also knows, and maybe she doesn't know in the back of her mind, that that's not enough, because she continuously says, and I think she even says it to Robert, that she won't belong to anyone again. When
Yep.
she's, explaining that her husband can't give her away because she belongs to herself. And it's just a kind of interesting back and forth, because she seems to want to, give herself to Robert and then, have that relationship. And I'm not convinced that even if he would have stuck around, that she would have been happy. I think that in her head, that was the one thing she was holding on to as like a hope of being happy. But I don't think that would have done it.
But I think it was like the idea of him too, because I
Yeah.
noticed when he came back, like, she said she didn't admit this to him, I don't think, but just to herself, she felt closer to him when he was in
Yeah.
because it could be, like you said, this fantasy that, oh, I'll be better when he comes back. Oh, what is he doing? Is he thinking of me? But then when he's back and he's kind of, they're able to actually spend some time, and he talks about marriage, says the M word, and she's like, what? and then, yeah, it just doesn't seem like, I mean, of course, she's still in love with him, but it's definitely, I don't know. I think she starts to realize that passion will leak from her over time.
Yeah. I think she even says that, as much as she like felt for him, she knew that one day in the future she
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just it's the book just seemed much more depressing this time around.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because, I've gone through feelings like that. Like, oh, I know that this happiness isn't going to last. Or, I thought, this would make me happy. The same with buying a house. I thought buying a house would make me happy. Now it costs money to maintain a house. Not happy anymore. She didn't really have to deal with that. But because as we've discussed, she had other people to do everything for her. But I think that, that's something a lot of people can connect to. Especially at the age she is in this book. She's 28 and 29.
I know.
So,
I missed that the first time.
Me too.
What?
I viewed her as older, and maybe it was because I was younger when I first read it, and I was like, oh, she must be so old. But she's younger than me in the book. So, but just that kind of always looking forward to what's going to make me happy. Is it, this new hobby? Is it, moving out? Is it having my own place? Is it having this relationship? And in the end, none of those things works long term. And there's always just this internal turmoil and questioning that's happening. And again, I mean, that's just something that is so relatable.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's interesting because I think about I don't think she ever had any time or was given the opportunity, I guess, to find out who she was. Because we think about like her children, Raoul and Etienne. I mean, if she's 28, they seem like they were definitely like older than my daughter, Eliana. So they were probably at least like 5 or something. So she had them, got married and had them like in her early 20s. And I think about like how important at least in my opinion, the early 20s, like I think, some people know what they want and they might choose to do, to start a family earlier. But I was thinking just about myself. And I'm like, oh, wow. I was still kind of figuring out who I was. And even me, like I've still, even after I got married and had my baby, I'm so grateful that I have a partner, my husband, who lets me become who I am, figure out, hey, I'm a different person than I was this time. I'm going to do this thing now, or I actually want to do this. I need flexibility to do this. And so I have a partner who lets me do that so I can grow and develop, even though I have these domestic responsibilities. And it was interesting when I was really taking in like how old she was. I completely missed that the first time. And again, because we were younger, so it sounded like maybe we just didn't notice it. But yeah, it's now that I've gone through those periods of those ages, I'm thinking about it in a very different way.
Well, even her relationship with her husband too. She's always indifferent to him, and she's admitted that she never loved him. It was, it just was what was expected and what, played out. And she's like, he's a good guy. He gives
But he's
me,
like so
what I need.
oblivious. He's
Well, he's not oblivious. He's concerned about how everything looks. And so like even when she buys or gets the new house, the fact that the way he chooses to react to it isn't just like he's like, okay, I've got to be calculated about this. I can't just say no, don't do that. I have to make it look like we're doing this on purpose as a couple because our house is being worked on and then we're going to try together. So
but why does he not know how dire this is? Like, I know the doctor told him, oh, just let her be. I'm like, Leonce, your wife is leaving you. I don't know why he doesn't know how like dire this is.
Like, would it have made a difference? Because when they were together, it just like they would argue.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a losing battle for him. I feel like, she was a woman with her mind made up. So I don't think it was going to help. And he almost wasn't concerned about her. He was just concerned about appearances and having the kids taken care of, which other people could do.
Exactly. So that's a good point, because I was just like, this man is like just totally just not with it. But that's a really good point. So these are all such incredible. We could talk about this forever. Which again, for those of you, if you haven't read The Awakening, I know we're giving some spoilers here, but if you haven't read The Awakening, it is there's infinite amount of things to pick out and to discuss at length. Incredible novel, so much symbolism, so much relevance. And I just highly recommend that you all read it. I would like to talk a little bit now just about, especially coming from Brittany, who's been collecting copies, and, how collecting The Awakening may be a bigger task than anyone first bargained for, especially nowadays. But when Brittany first asked me, like, oh, I'm trying to get, an earlier copy of The Awakening, I was like, oh, that's in the literary canon. We're going to find Brittany an awesome copy in like 10 seconds, but that was not the case. And to quote Bernard, I think it's Kowalski, is the way to pronounce it, from the 2009 book Awakenings, the story of Kate Chopin revival. I love this quote. Bernard says, no other American book was so maligned, neglected for so long, and then embraced so quickly and with such enthusiasm as Kate Chopin's 1809 novel, The Awakening. And we saw that when we were looking at copies. So when Brittany first asked me about some early copies of The Awakening, I found 2 printings of The Awakening available on the rare book market. And one was for $11,000 and the other was for $17,500. Something happened to the $17,500. I don't know if it went down in price or if someone actually bought it, but the only one now I can find is actually for $12,500. So a little bit better. But as you can see, it's like, what is causing this? And who was Kate Chopin? And why are first printings of her novels so hard to get? So I wanted to just quickly go over some research that I found. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. All right. Okay, so this is a picture of Kate Chopin. I believe she was born Catherine O'Flaherty, born in February in 1850 in St. Louis, and she was of French and Irish ancestry. She graduated from St. Louis Academy of the Sacred Heart in 1868, and then 2 years later, she married Oscar Chopin. They went to live in New Orleans. He was Creole. Oscar Chopin was Creole, like Mr. Pontellier in The Awakening. And over the next 11 years, their marriage produced 6 children, 5 sons and 1 daughter. And again, her children remember her as a very conscientious mother who deeply loved her husband. That's what her children remember, at least. Oscar actually died tragically in 1882 of swamp fever, and Kate heavily grieved. But then she went on and ran the home and I think carried on an affair, perhaps with a married neighbor. She returned to St. Louis in 1884 and began her literary career about 5 years later. And during the closing decade of the 19th century, she wrote about 100 short stories, 2 novels, and other works. So she is lauded for her regional fiction, especially. Let's see, this is from the Bentley Rare Book Museum. We have one of her collections of stories called Bayou Folk that was published in 1894. These are one of 2 of her collections of short stories. But in the Rare Book Room, we do not have a first edition copy of The Awakening. And I was like, what is going on? Why do we not have that? Well, The Awakening was published on April 22nd, 1899 by Herbert S. Stone and Company. And it's interesting because this novel was pretty much immediately attacked for its candor and for its what it would be considered an unorthodox portrayal of a woman who's unhappy in her marriage, experiences a sexual and emotional awakening, and eventually commits suicide. Even fellow writers like Willa Cather. I don't know if anyone has read Willa Cather before, like My Antonia. I read that by Willa Cather. Willa Cather was a fellow writer and was a fan of Kate Chopin, but she heavily criticized the novel, heavily. Kate Chopin had minimal royalties for the novel. The book was pulled away from circulation at some libraries. So here we see I found this from the New York Times in May. So a few weeks after The Awakening just came out, Macy's has it on its list of books. We have The Awakening here. So we see that, being advertised a bit, but then we start to see, this is by 1902. We're starting to see in Evanston, Illinois, some literary censorship happening, and you see this black list of books, and we have The Awakening on here. So that was interesting to find. And then, but look, these are from the Missouri Historical Society. There are letters from Kate Chopin's colleagues and friends and acquaintances letting her know how much they loved The Awakening. So I think there is this idea that, we can easily oversimplify by saying The Awakening was universally hated, and it was not. I think it got a lot of public criticism, but among, Kate Chopin's circle, there were definitely people who praised it and who really, really enjoyed the novel. So I don't want to act like just everyone hated it. So unfortunately, after the kind of fallout from The Awakening, Kate Chopin's 3rd collection of short stories was canceled by her publisher. We don't know if it was just because of The Awakening issue, but it probably was. And she didn't write as much after that. She wrote a few more works before she died in 1904. But this is the home that she lived in St. Louis, Missouri, the last, up until her death. And if anyone is wondering, the majority of Kate Chopin's archives and manuscripts are actually housed at the Missouri Historical Society. So just wanted to show a little bit of, a little bit of background on Kate Chopin. But one thing that's been really interesting is kind of figuring out how this novel experienced a revival. This is what the actual first printing looks like. Brittany, I wish I could get this for you. But
way too much money.
A little too much money. But it is beautiful. I really like it. So we have these first printings, but I did find that there was one printing in 1906 that occurred. And I am striving, I'm hoping to get a copy of that 1906 printing for the Rare Book Room. Very excited about that. But after that, the book was just out of print, neglected, somewhat forgotten. But it wasn't until the mid-century that scholars, one particular French scholar, Cyril Arnavant, was writing an article about Kate Chopin, and he was the first to translate it into French in 1953. And so that kind of brought it up again. And then there was this mysterious paperback edition published in 1964 by Capricorn Books, which would be considered the first paperback edition. And then Kate Chopin's revival really happened in 1969. So this picture I have on the right, the complete works of Kate Chopin, published by the Louisiana State Press. And it was written by, I believe he's Norwegian, so I don't exactly know how to say his name properly, but I think it might be Per Sejersted. He became incredibly interested in Chopin's work and wrote and edited the complete works of Kate Chopin, and really brought her back. And it wasn't just him, though. It was the time that it happened. We're thinking of the feminist movement is happening, and everything is happening at the right time. Social movements and but largely feminism. It was the right moment, finally, for the awakening to come back to society. I think society, especially women, crave this now. And again, I think it's Emily Tough, another scholar who has done a lot to, bringing out Kate Chopin's biography and her work. So scholars just started to talk about Kate Chopin again, especially these scholars doing it during the mid-century and later. So one thing that's really cool that I'm having trouble finding, I couldn't even find a photo, but I'm on the hunt. In November 1972, I didn't even tell you this, Brittany, The Awakening was actually in full text, was featured in the mass circulated magazine Red Book. And I really want to get a copy of that. I believe it was November 1972. So I can't find one anywhere, but I really want to get a copy of that. So from the 1980s and onward, The Awakening really started to become what it is today, a text that we read in high school. But it took a while. And Kate Chopin was never able to see that happen. But anyway, so that is why collecting The Awakening, early editions of The Awakening are very difficult because it was out of print for long periods of time. And Kate Chopin did not receive much money from those first printings. The novel was heavily criticized by the public. So I guess we can kind of ascertain that. We can almost think, oh yeah, that makes sense. But it's interesting to see how that even affects people collecting the book now. So that is why it is difficult to find. But Brittany, have you ever heard of the Haunted Chamber?
Okay. No.
So I wanted to, hopefully I haven't lost it. I have it right here. Okay. So I didn't know about the Haunted Chamber. We're going to kind of close with this. I did not know about the Haunted Chamber until recently, but it's something that all the scholars, they talk about. So Kate Chopin wrote a poem to go along. She wrote it actually when The Awakening was still in production. It was, I think, in February, and The Awakening came out in April. She wrote a poem, and I think this poem is interesting because it is kind of, I think, anticipating some of the reactions to the book. So I'm just going to read it aloud. And again, didn't know about this poem, but this is kind of how she anticipates, I think, reactions to The Awakening. I believe a man is kind of the narrator here. The Haunted Chamber. Oh, and the man is talking about, I think, The Awakening, I believe. Of course, 'twas an excellent story to tell of a fair, frail, passionate woman who fell. It may have been false, it may have been true. That was nothing to me, it was less to you. But with bottle between us and clouds of smoke from your last cigar, 'twas more of a joke than a matter of sin or a matter of shame that a woman had fallen and nothing to blame. So far as you or I could discover, but her beauty, her blood, and an ardent lover. But when you were gone and the lights were low, and the breeze came in with the moon's pale glow, the far, faint voice of a woman I heard. 'Twas but a wail, and it spoke no word. It rose from the depths of some infinite gloom, and its tremulous anguish filled the room. Yet the woman was dead and could not deny, but women will forever will whine and cry. So now I must listen the whole night through to the torment with which I had nothing to do. But women forever will whine and cry, and men forever must listen and sigh. So that's a whole nother topic. So I can get you a copy of that if you wanted to like
Yes. I
dive
love
deeper
that.
into it. But yeah, interesting that this man who read The Awakening is like, oh, whatever. And then he
Gotta
just,
listen to women.
yeah, then keeps getting haunted by this little whale. And he's like, I had nothing to do with that. Like, so it's really interesting that she wrote that when The Awakening was still in production. So there's a whole lot to say about that, but I can get you a copy of The Haunted Chamber. So really interesting. But Brittany, I just wanted to thank you so much for chatting with me today and about The Awakening. And thank you for, again, pivoting in terms of format. But you have such great insights. And that paper you wrote, was that like a thesis type thing or just a...
I think it was just a paper that semester. I don't remember. I'll have to look and see if I still have it. It's probably terrible, but I need to see if I have it.
Well, I think I think it's probably awesome. And your theme too, like that was a lot to pick up on, like as a high schooler. So congrats on that. And I'm so glad that this novel is still something that you are willing to talk with us about, and so much fun. So I guess in the next, I need to wait a couple years and reread it so that I can have another revelation on it. But anyway, truly appreciate you and everyone who will watch this. Thank you so much for being with us today. We have our next program. If you're on the listserv, then I will send you that information. If you want to be on the virtual Coffee with a Curator listserv, please just email rarebooks@kennesaw.edu. And we will get you signed up if you like more programs like this, but just live. So anyway, so again, thank you all so much, and happy Women's History Month. It is still Women's History Month, and we're so grateful for that. And again, please come and visit us. All right. Thanks so much, everybody.